Hello, everybody. Adam Parks here with another episode of Receivables Roundtable. Today, I am here with Mary Jo Terry from Yrefy to talk a little bit about the student loan game. How you doing today, Mary Jo?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. I really appreciate you coming on. I know that your expertise in student loans is something that I think we can all learn from today. But also, I know how difficult it is to stay at the forefront of student loans and such a hot button item these days. But for anybody who's not familiar with you, could you tell everybody a little bit about yourself and how you got to the seat that you're in today?
Absolutely. I've been in the education industry since the beginning of the 90s when I was actually in college. Worked with the Department of Education on the creation of rehab as well as consolidation loans, as well as owned multiple lending companies in a multitude of verticals, not just education. So currently, we started a company called Yrefy, and the point of Yrefy is to really help student borrowers, their co-signers, who have graduated with a significant amount of private education loan debt and or federal debt and ended up getting themselves in a delinquency, default, or charge-off situation. Oftentimes we run into individuals who didn't even know how much they were borrowing through their education process. So the point of Yrefy is to really counsel somebody through. Our average call time is about 45 minutes. It's a significant amount of time to walk somebody through their federal loans, their private loans, as well as if they have personal loans that they're trying to resolve as they go through. The intent is to try to get them out of a delinquency or negative amortization situation and get their loans repaid at a low fixed interest rate. The intention is really, believe it or not, a social impact scenario to really help individuals keep their jobs, help individuals get themselves out of what they would consider a delinquent borrower and put themselves back into good repayment situation so that their lives get a little bit easier, because everything's more expensive when you're in default, including just simple things like car insurance.
Sure. I mean, no question about it. And I think we, are regularly talking about the effect of negative credit and, why you get cheaper credit when you have good credit. And I think that's kind of one of the fundamental things that we all talk to consumers about over time. But, student loans is something that is changing. One, we've got a rise in interest rates. Two, we've got the Biden administration trying to forgive certain types of loans. And I think we're seeing a lot of confusion in the media because I don't think that the media's portrayal of student loans or the current situation of student loans is often accurate, I think would be a good word to use. And so as someone who's actually living and breathing this, from a day-to-day perspective, like what are you seeing right now?
We're seeing a lot of negative things going on associated with student loans. There's a lot of confusion, even in the media, on whether they're trying to forgive loans or they're trying to cancel loans. There's a substantial difference between the two. Oftentimes get questions along those lines. And are these loans actually going to be forgiven? We tried to utilize a law, believe it or not, from 9/11 in order to kind of push this through, this loan forgiveness through. And depending on whose numbers you look at, it's in $400-600 billion range that's going to cost taxpayers to do this loan forgiveness. It's currently being blocked by two courts, saying that it's not constitutional. It needs to actually run through the congressional process in order to be approved and move forward. But in the meantime, we're continuing to almost kick the can down the street and not put student loans back into repayment, which is also costing the taxpayers a significant amount of money. But as a result of that, what we're seeing is a lot of individuals are completely confused on who to pay, who not to pay, what they owe, what they don't owe. And there's a lot of misconceptions sitting out there. Will they be forgiven? Will they not be forgiven? And so it'll definitely be interesting in the next 30, 60 days, especially when they're talking about the Supreme Court taking this up as a legitimate issue. But every single taxpayer, regardless if you make $50,000 or more, is going to end up with footing part of the bill associated with this loan forgiveness. We're also seeing a lot of significant concern about variable interest rates. Variable interest rates, the Treasury bill went up, so therefore direct loan interest rates went up. and direct loans interest rates on, especially if you're talking about a parent plus loan, were significant prior and now are even more significant. And then on the private side, it's even a worse scenario. We're running into people that are at 14% interest rates, that are looking above 14% interest rates due to the change in the market. And they're desperately seeking a solution to refinance these loans. And these are individuals that have never been in a hardship financial situation, who before could make their principal and interest payments. With the new rate changes, they can't even make an interest only payment. And it's a pretty significant hit to these individuals that have 700 plus FICO scores, or even 650 plus FICO scores, that are really truly concerned that everything in their life is going to go substantially up, because if your credit goes down, everything in your life gets impacted.
Well, the cost of everything goes up exponentially when you have bad credit or you're currently in delinquency. So every dollar that you're going to spend at a gas station or on a credit card is ultimately going to cost you a little bit more, which is a scary thought. It sounds to me a little bit like the kind of bubble that we saw, in the mortgage marketplace back in 2007, 2008, in terms of these ARM loans, or these variable rate loans, adjustable rate mortgages, were starting to take effect, and we were seeing this like dramatic change in the value of these payments, right? That was being required. Now, when it comes to the student loans, we're not looking at any kind of balloon payment at the end or anything like that. They're just not able to make their standard amortized loan payments.
And as a result of that, what we're seeing is they're going into an interest only payment scenario, which now they're in a negative interest amortization situation, which means the balance of your loan is going up every month. It's not going down. We speak with individuals every single day who have watched their loans go up thousands and thousands of dollars in the last year, and are expected for that to continue with the higher interest rate and the inability to actually make their payments. And these are individuals who have always had good credit or are moving forward. But unfortunately, this isn't just going to impact the borrower. It's also going to impact the family member, who it's usually a family member who actually co-signed for these loans. And there's about a 92% co-sign rate on private education loans. And now they're looking for a solution to refinance. We're seeing that some individuals with 700 plus FICO scores are getting turned down by the major lenders and are getting desperate to figure out what that solution is going to be. We're constantly counseling at Yrefy to try to put them or push them into one of our partners' directions if we can't help them. But this is going to become a big crisis in the education industry, much less what's going on with the mortgage world, because the mortgage world, there's tons of variable interest rates. There's tons of seconds sitting on people's homes. The economy was doing well. Your home value was going up significantly, and people took additional loans out against that home value. And we're starting to see home values come down, and we're also starting to see interest rates go up. So it's a really scary position to be in for a lot of these individuals. They don't just have private loans, they have personal loans, they have mortgage loans, they have other assets sitting out there, much less if you're in any kind of credit card debt, because we're watching those rates go through the roof as well.
Well, I think that's a difficult balance, right? Because the student loan is something that they've already received, whereas, they're going to continue to make that car payment because they need that car to get to work, right? So I'm wondering how quickly some of these bubbles start to burst, or in which order we start to see consumers when faced with the decision of what am I going to pay and what am I not going to pay this month. And that's a
Well,
difficult scenario to be in.
It's going to be very, very interesting. I've had a lot of conversations about really taking a look at your debt overall, and it seems like a very simple conversation to have, to even figure out what debt you owe, what your rates are. But most Americans just don't take the time to really even put a budget together or determine, hey, should I pay off credit card A or credit card B first? But at least individuals are getting a little proactive on their private education loans to try to find a solution before they go into the January rate changes. These are significant numbers, and it's a little scary out there. We're talking to individuals that are willing to default in order to find other refi programs, in order to figure out what to do. Believe it or not, some Some of them have 3 loans with the same lender with 3 different due dates. And this
Right.
happens all the time, and they don't know who to pay. So what they'll have is they'll have 3 or 4 loans with one lender, and you'll see 2 of them current and 2 of them delinquent because they can only pay the first 2. It's been quite interesting.
So as you look at these ARM changes, right, or these rate changes, what kind of payment differential have you been seeing, right? Like their payments going up 300 a month, 800 a month. Like what's that differential starting to look like? And I realize that's a case
Well,
by case basis, but just trying to give it some perspective.
Well, if you're really looking at, on average, these guys have any, believe it or not, anywhere from $30,000 to $40,000 in private education loans. They're pretty substantial. Obviously, you have individuals with less, but we're seeing $250 a month rate increases, easy, which is a substantial number. And a lot of them have not refied to consolidate them into one payment. So you kind of have to think about, if you're talking about $250 over 4 loans, it doesn't sound like a substantial number, but when you add it together, it is a big number in somebody's monthly expenses. And this is
If you're living
without federal
paycheck to
loans being
paycheck,
into
250 is a
repayment.
difference.
250 is a huge difference. It's
Yeah.
a difference on whether you can afford the milk or not afford the milk,
Yeah.
right? Or afford the name brand cereal or not afford the name brand cereal. I mean, and there's been a lot of layoffs on top of this. And so there's a lot of individuals scrambling to try to figure out what to do with inflation. And we are in the holiday season. And hey, guys, everybody doesn't have to get a gift.
Mhm.
You can pick and choose, right? You can cut the budget down. Everybody's in the same boat you are. Have a conversation with your family member and say, hey, I can't buy Johnny a gift this year, but maybe we can go do something. There are options sitting out there.
Absolutely, and I think that the time of year, the layoffs, the rate increases that have been pretty consistent, and I think the Fed is already signaling that we should expect to see more rate increases because they believe it curbs inflation, which is something that remains to be actually seen in terms of curbing our inflation right now. But the continued rate increases are going to have an effect across the board. I mean, just looking at the mortgages and seeing what you the payment that you could buy a $600,000 house for, you can now not even get a $300,000 house for that same payment rate just because of the differential in the rates themselves. So I'm curious to see, and so with you guys spending so much time, working with these consumers, trying to help them when they're in, when they kind of meet the parameters of your lending platforms, you're trying to help these people ultimately refi their way out or find different means by which to stay current, which is good. Now, a lot of the student loans are still under forbearance from the COVID situation as well. And when is that currently scheduled to end? I know they keep kicking the can down the road, but
It's currently scheduled to end in June of next year. So they did do the extension from December, January to June, but we'll see what happens there. But a lot of these individuals, believe it or not, even in anticipation of a possible forgiveness program, even if you've made payments, some of these guys are getting refunds back.
mhm.
So the servicers are actually sending the money back to the student who made payments during COVID. So it's severely it's crazy out there to watch some of the stuff that's going on, and the intention is good. The intention is maybe you can get your loans forgiven, but what are you going to do with that additional capital? More than likely, it's not going to get put back to your student loans. It might go to cover your holiday gifts or these other things, but we are not encouraging individuals to go in delinquency and default, and are encouraging them to take 10, 15 minutes, go out, fill out 5 or 6 forms, do a soft credit pull, and see what your other options are sitting there. But some of these guys are so desperate, they are going to default, they are going to go in delinquency and try to find an alternative program that can get them into a low fixed interest rate loan in order to get them out of the situation that they're in. Not encouraging it, but we are seeing that wave coming down.
Well, it sounds like in June that bubble bursts, right? So, I mean, there's all kinds of
Mm-hmm.
challenges that are being faced now, but the influx of that wave or the monsoon, so to speak, is really going to become a bigger issue in 2023. As that, I mean, there has to come a point in time in which people have to pay their loans again, right? Like the economy From a
That's the
response
idea.
standpoint, is we've kind of already come out of the COVID side of things. Employment is not at the same rates that it was, but like we're continuing to kick the can down the road, and I don't know if we're actually benefiting anybody. I understood, I guess, on some level, some of these rent or eviction moratoriums and things, but I mean, at some point, we all have to start paying back into the system. Like, where's the government getting the money to lend to new students if we're not having any money coming in? But maybe that's part of what's driving inflation.
I've talked to people over and over who don't even know who their servicer is any longer, or how much they owe. And it's a scary place to be, not even recognizing, because servicers changed over the last 2.5 years. They've dropped
Mhm.
out, new ones have come in. And it's a scary place for these individuals to be, and not really understanding how to navigate this. This is not a good situation for anybody that has student loans, or the economy as a whole, because playing kick the can and thinking you're never going to have to pay these loans back, the way legislation sits right now, they're not bankruptcy remote. You can't declare bankruptcy on them. You can't get out of these loans. And so unless it's a permanent disability, or even if a school has closed, you could still be responsible for loans associated with that degree. So you have to think about what you're borrowing. For every dollar you borrow, you pay back $2.
Hmm.
So that's a real statistic. So did you really need to do that trip somewhere, or did you really need to live on campus? You kind of need to think about those things. Unfortunately, we do not live in the best society where mom and dad are signing off on a bunch of stuff that these kids do not know what they owe. And that's a scary situation.
It definitely is a scary situation, and not helpful at all in terms of putting people on the right financial footing for their future. And part of that is the cost of education and the selection of the degrees that people tend to go after. Underwater basket weaving is probably not going to pay as well as a master's of
Art
information
history
technology.
degree is not going to get me where I need
Yeah,
to
I mean, I
go.
don't want to be too specific, but like, you
No,
kind of got to
it's
look at
you're not wrong.
what's the earning
You're
potential once I have this degree? I mean, don't get me wrong. I'm someone who ran up $100,000 worth of student loans, right, between an undergraduate and a master's degree at a private university. But if you take advantage of the opportunities that are presented to you, we can pay back our loans. It does work. It does happen. And I realize that not everybody's in that situation, but I think for anybody who's watching, who's thinking about student loans, you really need to think about, what am I borrowing for? Like, what value am I getting from the money that I'm borrowing? And does this make sense, right? So it's an interesting overall topic here, and I'm curious to see how this continues to evolve over the next, call it, 6 months.
We keep watching what's going on politically, what's going on with the courts, and we're always counseling people to try to, skip your favorite fast food or coffee shop and really put it towards any debt you have, whether it's a credit card, student loans, mortgages, or even putting it away for a rainy day fund. What we don't want to see is people completely tied down from now until eternity and not be able to help the next generation move forward. And if you went into a good degree program where you're not going to make a lot of money, like if you're a teacher or a social worker, take advantage of the public service loan forgiveness and other programs that are out there. There's endowment funds that will help pay you back your student loans for going into these social impact jobs. And let's do the research and figure out what you can do. All of us, including me, having this conversation, we've had education loans. You just got to figure out a way to pay them back and move forward. And based on those decisions, it's crazy.
Well, I greatly appreciate you coming on and talking with me about the current state of student loans in our space and in our country. I'm hoping you'll come back again and provide us with a little bit of an update, as we get a little closer to the
Absolutely.
June timeline, and can kind of keep our finger on the pulse of this. And what does that mean in terms of volumes coming back into, the receivables management industry from a debt collection standpoint? Because I know there was a lot of turnover with the services and other things like you've been talking about. So, Mary Jo, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. And if there's any questions, let us know. Between myself and my team, one of us will be able to get significant information. We're always talking to Washington on a daily basis, as you are, I'm sure. just trying to keep a pulse of what's going on in the economy, inflation, and regardless of whether it's student loans or something else, every single dollar impacts every single one of us.
Absolutely. For those of you that are watching, if you have additional questions that you'd like to ask Mary Jo and myself, you can leave those in the comments on both LinkedIn and YouTube. We'll be happy to respond to those. If you have any additional topics that you'd like to see us cover, you can leave those in the comments as well. We'll be happy to get to those just as quickly as we can. But in the short term, Mary Jo, thank you so much for coming on and chatting with me today. I'm sure I'll see you in February at the RMAI annual conference in Las Vegas. But until
Absolutely.
then, thank you so much.
Have a great holiday.
You as well. We'll see you soon.